Okay, so today in this lesson, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using Pythagoras Theorem again, but today what we're going to be using is using the formula to find the length of a hypotenuse. So instead of just proving whether a triangle is right angled or not right angled, today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be determining what the length of an actual unknown side length is. Okay, so our learning intention today is, as I said, to use Pythagoras Theorem to find the length of the hypotenuse, specifically the hypotenuse. The success criteria is that you know the formula, you can label the sides of a triangle according to the formula, you can then substitute the values, so substitute the numbers in for the letters or the pronumerals, and then you need to be able to solve that equation to find the value of C, because as we know, C is the value of the hypotenuse. Okay, so for our first example, what you'll be presented with is something much like this. So you'll be given a triangle, you'll be told it's right angled because otherwise our formula is not going to work, so it'll definitely have to have a right angle there. And then what will happen is you'll be given two side lengths. So for this triangle, ours is going to be 8 centimeters one way and 15 centimeters the other way. Now obviously today's learning intention is to be able to find the value of the hypotenuse. So that means the hypotenuse is the value is the side that we don't know. So that's going to be left blank, or you're going to have a pronumeral given there. So the first step, as always, is to write out your formula that you need. So I know that a squared plus b squared will give me c squared. So I've written down my formula. Now I need to determine which side is going to be A, B, and C. So as we've already established that this is going to be the hypotenuse, and from our last video we learned that the hypotenuse is always across from the right angle, so we can use this as an arrow. The hypotenuse is also the longest side, so that leaves these as A and B. Now a reminder, A and B, they're interchangeable. A and B can be either of the two short sides, but C must always be the longest side. So after I've labelled my sides, the next thing I need to do is substitute the values of these into here. So A, we've determined, is going to be 8, so I'm going to make that 8 squared. B is going to be 15, so I'm going to make that 15 squared. And we don't know what C is, so there's no value that we can substitute for C. So the next thing we need to do is we need to use our calculator, or if you're really confident you can do it in your head. I'm going to type in 8 squared to get 64. Then I'm going to type in 15 squared to get 225. And we know that is going to give us C squared. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add these two things together. So we're going to go 64 plus 225, and that'll give us 289 equals C squared. Now, this is where a lot of people will think they're finished. A lot of people will go, all right, I've done the squared and I've added them together and I know C squared is 289. But you need to think, firstly, this is C squared, not C. And secondly, would this make sense? Would it make sense if this side of my triangle was 289 centimeters? Most likely not. In fact, definitely not. So what we need to do is we need to find what C is by itself. So we need to do the inverse of squaring a number. So inverse meaning that if we're squaring a number, well, the inverse is then going to be the square root. So what we're going to do the inverse of this, we need to do the square root of 289, and that will give us C. So what you need to notice here is the C squared has become C because we've done the inverse of this. We've done the inverse of that to make it a square root. That you can do on your calculator. You just need to find the square root function on your particular calculator. 289, the square root of that is going to be 17. So I'm going to get 17 here, and that equals C. So I can say C is 17 centimeters. That would be the length of my unknown side. The last thing you really need to do is check does this make sense? Does 17 centimeters make sense in regards to this triangle? When I say does it make sense, C needs to be the longest side. So if I've got 8, 15, yes, 17 does make sense because it is longer than both 15 and 8. Also, it's not crazy big that it sounds stupid, like 289 would sound stupid, okay? So that's a way of checking, am I done? Okay, so this is going to be the next triangle that we do. We've got a right angled here. We're going to make this 9 centimeters. We're going to make this 8 centimeters. And we're going to leave one side blank. So the formula, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. The next thing we need to do, label our sides. So, I mean, the big clue in this is that obviously this lesson is about trying to find the length of a hypotenuse. So obviously the one we don't know is going to be the hypotenuse. However, that's not always going to be the case. So across from the right angle is going to be C. These can be A and B interchangeable. It does not matter. The short sides are interchangeable. So we've got A and B. Now what I'm going to do is substitute. So I've decided that A is going to be 8. So I'm going to have 8 squared. I've decided B is going to be 9. So that's going to be 9 squared. And we don't know what C is. So we can't substitute that for anything just yet. All right, 8 squared is 64. 8 times 8 is 64. 9 squared, 9 times 9 is 81. And then we're going to have that there. Now, remember, if you don't know what these numbers are, you can use your calculator. You don't have to do it all in your head. 64 and 81 together is going to be 145. Now, this is where you have to ask yourself, am I done? Does 145 make sense to go here? No, because we still have this squared. Remember, we want to do the inverse of squared, which means we have to do the square root. So you need to do the square root of 145 on your calculator. Find your calculator. Square root sign 145 is going to be 12.04. So let's say we'll round this to do 2 decimal points. So we're going to make it 12.04. So C equals 12.04 centimeters. Again, let's double check, does this make sense? C is the longest side, so it needs to be longer than 9. It also needs to be longer than 8. 12 makes sense. It's also not crazy big that it sounds stupid, so it's not 145 centimeters, okay? So that's how we know if we've done it correctly. Okay, so this is the last one we're going to do. So you might find, I mean, excuse the fact this is a little bit wonky, but you might find you've got a triangle that looks like this. And you might be told that this is 4 meters, and you might be given one of these, okay? So these symbols here mean that these two sides are the same length. So, same process as always. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. We're getting used to it now. All right, so we need to decide which is A, which is B, which is C. C is always the longest side and it's opposite the right angle. Now in this scenario, you've got 2 that are unknown, so it's really easy to try and trick you. However, we know that it's opposite the right angle. So we turn our little right angle into an arrow, and that means we'll know that this is going to be C. And obviously, if this is 4 meters, this side here also is 4 meters. We're going to make this one A, we're going to make this one B. It doesn't matter which because they're both short sides and they're interchangeable, so long as this one is C. All right, I've decided that A is 4, so I'm going to go 4 squared. I've decided that B is 4, so B is going to become 4 as well. And then C, we don't know what that is, so we're going to leave that blank. 4 squared is 16. 4 squared is 16 because 4 times 4 is 16, 4 times 4 is 16. All right, 16 plus 16, I know that one in my head. That one's 32. Still going to be C squared. Are we done? No, we're not, because we've still got this. And also 32 would sound really stupid here. So we are going to make this the square root of 32 on your calculator. Square root button, 32, 5.656. So if we're rounding to 2 decimal places, we have to look at this 6. The 6 tells us that we have to round up, so it's going to become 5.66. 5.66 is C. We can write that over here as C equals 5.66 meters if we would like, which you should do. And that makes sense because 4 and 4, 5 is longer because it's the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is always the longest side, and it's not crazy big. It doesn't sound silly. So if we think back to our learning intention was to use Pythagoras' formula to find the length of a hypotenuse. You have to know what the formula is, label the sides correctly, substitute the numbers in, solve to find C. So if you can do all that, then you've met today's success criteria.